All right. Well, hello there, everyone. So I took delivery on this bike in February of this year, so about 4 months ago. And as of this morning, I just got the email this morning, she's paid off. I officially own this bike outright. I'm just waiting for the title to arrive in the mail. Now, when I rode this bike for the first few months, I was very careful to baby it through the break-in period, just to make sure that I wasn't gonna do anything stupid. And I finished my 600 miles, did that first oil change. For the last month and a half, really, I've been sort of opening it up a little bit and preparing it for what would be my first big adventure. And so here we are, we get to the meat of this video. So last week, I got back from a 7-day Moto adventure tour of northern Arizona, southern Utah, and mostly Colorado. This trip took me over 1,500 miles or 2,500 kilometers. I rode on all sorts of varied terrain, mostly paved, but quite a bit of forest roads and dirt roads and a little bit of technical stuff, but mostly paved and forest roads. I just put out a 6-part series related to this trip, and I thought this was a perfect time to talk to you all about my impressions of this bike. And so let me just jump right in on what I'm calling my delightful and convenient discoveries regarding the Ibex 450. First and foremost, I want to talk about the performance. This is really important. In all 1,500 miles of this trip, I never once felt like the bike was lacking in power. And this is a really important point and one of the major reasons why I wanted to upgrade to a new bike. Even climbing the steep and high elevation mountain passes, sometimes up to 11 or 12,000 feet, the bike never struggled. On the highways, of which I rode many, I mostly cruised along in sort of the mid 70 mile per hour range. No issues whatsoever. Occasionally I'd take it up over 80 or 85 if I needed to pass someone, but I was very content to sort of chill at about 75 miles per hour. Technically with the hard panniers, you're not supposed to go over 75 miles per hour anyway. So that was just another reason why I was sort of happy to sit there at that speed. Also with regards to the performance, I really enjoyed being on a twin. And this was another reason why I chose this bike over the new Himalayan. It was, quote, delightfully and well-behaved and smooth as compared to my old Himalayan. These are my actual notes. The bike never felt cheap or felt like it was going to fall apart on me. I know this is a really big concern for people that are possibly interested in this bike, but then learn that it's a Chinese-made bike. They're like, reliability, is it gonna fall apart? Is it gonna rattle apart? Or bolts gonna come flying out? I had zero issues. The one exception that I think is worth noting is the windshield. So, this windshield has a clicker on it where you can elevate it up and down. And if you have the windshield propped up and you're on a very bumpy, rattly dirt road, the windshield does sort of rattle around and bounce around. So I just made sure to click it down anytime that I was off-road. And I think that I would probably also not mount any sort of GPS unit to the little standard bar. I think it would just rattle around on there. On the Himalayan, a lot of stuff did rattle apart and did fall off. The very first time I took that bike up to Colorado and I parked it, I noticed 2 bolts were missing that had just sort of unscrewed themselves and popped out. So far, 2,200 miles on this bike, I haven't noticed a single bolt or a single piece coming loose. And I was very careful and vigilant. After every long day, I would inspect the bike, check for cables, check for loose things. Never once found a single part on this bike that needed to be tightened. All right, what about gas mileage? This is a question that I get a lot. On the Himalayan, I would get on a good day about 200 miles on a tank. On this bike, even on the days that I was riding 300 miles on all highway, I was consistently getting over 225 miles on a tank. But here's the important distinction is the gauge, the gas gauge on this bike, spot on. I never had range anxiety. I never had fuel anxiety. I always knew if I looked down and it said I have 74 miles remaining, I knew it was accurate. I would fill the tank up and be like, yep, that's right where it said it was. And this is a huge difference coming from the Himalayan. The Himalayan's gas gauge was essentially useless. It would sit on full for 100 miles and then would just plummet all the way down to reserve. And then once on reserve, I had no idea how long I had. So I constantly worried about carrying extra fuel and range anxiety. Not once did I carry a single liter of extra fuel on this trip. So great gas mileage. Is the new Himalayan better? Maybe slightly because it's a single, but 225 miles to 250 miles on a tank is more than I will ever need. And if I do happen to find myself someplace where I'm wildly remote, I can always carry a little bit of extra fuel. What about the stock seat? So I did choose to keep the stock seat on for this trip. I do have the aftermarket larger, tall seat that's more comfortable, but I decided that given that this was my first multi-day long distance trip, and I just barely flat foot with the stock seat, that I didn't want to add another variable. Basically, my assessment is that it's really comfortable up until about 225 to 250 miles. Once you get over 250 miles on a day, your backside does start to get a little bit sore. So that's kind of the limit for me on it. Way more comfortable than the stock seat was on my Himalayan. I have no desire to go out and buy a Seat Concepts or something. Ergonomics, what I have here written is that standing felt quite natural and comfortable. But by the end of the trip, I did notice that I was a little bit more hunched over than I think I would like to be in standing. There's a small chance I might consider putting on some small risers on the handlebars. I might play around with it a little bit. Sitting felt entirely natural. I have no complaints about the sitting position, sort of where my hands naturally rest on the handlebars. A lot of people complain about sort of the cramped feel of their legs. I didn't really notice this. I mean, I'm not a very tall person. I'm only 5'9", 32-inch inseam, and I feel like the bike was sort of spec'd for a person of my dimensions. Wind protection I thought was great. I do have the aftermarket taller windshield from CFMoto that adds a few centimeters. It completely eliminates the buffeting on my helmet. Obviously you still get wind coming in from the sides. Electronics and instrument panel. I do think the TFT gives me nearly every bit of data and information that I want. The things that I like is I can easily scroll through my trip meters. I can very easily turn on and off the ABS switch. I have measurements of my average fuel consumption, my average miles remaining, the voltage on the battery, an actual clock, which sounds silly, but a lot of motorcycles don't actually show you the time, and engine temperature, which I think is really important as well. As I said, turning on and off the ABS was brilliant. The button is right next to your left thumb, so you can just sort of reach over while you're riding and push it, and that's the key while you're riding. Let's try it. Yeah, look at that, off-road mode. You can turn on and off the ABS while the bike is moving and while the bike is in gear. The only exception is you can't be applying any throttle. So you just have to lay off the throttle, hold the button down for like 2 or 3 seconds, and boom, it goes into off-road mode. There were multiple times I'd get on a dirt road and just boop, hit the button really quick, and boom, I was off. I didn't have to pull over, I didn't have to stop, didn't have to put the bike in neutral. Fantastic. Every bike should be this easy. I can't stress that enough. The storage. So as you can see, I did decide to go with the big lockable pannier hard storage. I talked about this in a video before I left. This was a pretty big decision. These are very expensive. I had soft bags. I was gonna just use the soft bags, but then I started thinking about how I was gonna be parking the bike overnight at trailheads while I was hiking, and I had my laptop and all these things that I wanted to securely store to the bike. So I splurged. I got a little bit of a deal on them because I had some credit with the store. Long story, but I got them for several $100s cheaper than they are new, but still very expensive. I think they worked really well. Normally I'm not a huge fan of top boxes, but I did decide to go with the full set on this trip. Now, if you watch the video clips, you'll notice that this was basically all I had. I had the 3 boxes and everything was in those 3 boxes. The one exception is I had a small climbing pack that I sort of strapped to the back of the top box, and I had my climbing clothes in that bag. Everything else was in the 3 primary panniers. All my camera equipment, my drone equipment, all of my tools, first aid, maintenance, tire pumping kits, my bike cover, my rain gear, my trail running shoes, extra food, water bottle, puffy, laptop, plug and supplies for my laptop, my hiking helmet, a fleece layer, all my toiletries, my trekking poles, my emergency bivy sleep sack, a inflatable thermarest pad, and all of my clothes for a week-long trip and various other bits and pieces. So all of that fit into those 3 bins. Again, the only thing I had in that sort of backpacking pack that I'd strapped up was my hiking clothes. I did buy aftermarket tires for this bike. They're sitting in my garage right now. I bought a pair of the Tusk 2 tracks, which are more of a true 50-50 tire. And my intention was to put them on the bike before this trip to Colorado. But the more I looked at these tires and thought about what I was going to be doing, the more I realized it seemed like a real waste to take off a perfectly good set of tires. I'll just say that these have over 2,000 miles on them now, and they're barely showing it. The front tire looks brand new. You can't even tell. The back tire's got a little bit of wear, but I bet you I can get at least 4,000 or 5,000 more miles out of these tires. And I have no plans to put those tusks on until these are wiped out. Also, the note I have on here is I love that they're tubeless. This is such an important thing. My kit that I carried with me on this trip was a pump, a tube of sort of the sealant stuff that you can spray into a tube, and a patch kit. And that was it. Heat management seemed to work really well. The radiator fan would kick on. I think it comes on at 90C, whatever that is, 196 maybe. And sure enough, I'd watch that temperature go up, and as soon as it would hit like 194, boom, the fan would kick on and it would drop down back into the 180s. So it was very consistent. It operated well, even on a day where I was riding across the Utah desert and it was like 105 degrees. The bike never overheated, never gave me any symptoms that it was struggling in the heat. So no issues with heat is what I would say. One other important asterisk I have here is I did make sure to check the oil level in the sight glass every morning before starting my day, and the oil level never went down. So this bike did not burn any oil. A very quick note on suspension. Before leaving my house, I did play a little bit with the settings. Mostly I softened things up just a smidge with the clickers, but I also loaded the rear preload a little bit because I knew I was going to be carrying all this extra weight, which was surprisingly easy to adjust. You just tap the little ring with a screwdriver to break it free, and then you use the little C-wrench that comes on the bike under the seat and just crank it around a couple of turns. And there's specifications in the owner's manual. I just went to whatever it said with the panniers and then tightened it back up, and I think it made a noticeable difference. I went over all sorts of bumps and swoops and crazy washboarded roads and hit several potholes, and never once did either the forks or the rear suspension bottom out. Plush and cushy on the one side, especially on the highways, but also responsive and not too squishy off-road.
Man, the bike does really well. The suspension is dialed up nicely, I think. I like it. She feels good.
So I think I've really got it dialed in, and I'm happy to share my settings that I've got everything clicked to in the notes if people are interested. But for the record, I'm about 155 pounds, probably about 170 with all my gear on. And that about covers it, I think. That's sort of my general takeaways from the trip. Very pleased with the first ride. I didn't have any weird moments where I kind of was like, wait, what was that? What was that weird noise? Or why did the bike jerk like this? Or what's going on? It always operated to my expectations. However, things I might change or small nitpicks and issues. And there are a few. First thing that I have noted on here are the RPMs. This is a constant comment I get about the RPMs, that this bike revs really high. Why didn't I buy the Himalayan? It revs much lower. Am I worried that when I'm on the highway, it's going at 7,000 RPM? So yes, at highway speeds of 75 miles per hour with the stock tires and the stock gearing, the bike revs at 7,000 RPM. And this really seems to bother people. I don't know why, because this is well within the operating spec of the bike. You do not redline on this bike until you get to something like 8,600 or even 9,000 RPM. So riding along at 7,000 RPM is perfectly fine, perfectly normal within the operating green range of this bike. But an important note is when I do go to put those other tires on the bike, the tusks, the rear wheel is slightly bigger, which if you do the math, will result in the RPMs dropping by about 200 to 300 in sixth gear. So meaning once I put those new tires on, I'm riding along at 75 miles per hour. Instead of cruising at 7,000 RPM, I'll be cruising at about 6,700 RPM. So that is one way to reduce the RPM. Now, a lot of people will put the 15-tooth sprocket up front to bring that down even more, but I am not going to do that. I decided, I came away from this trip very firm in that decision. I like the stock gearing. I like, especially off-road, I can kind of putt along in second gear. I'm really happy with the way the bike is geared. which I know, again, given how much highway I rode, you'd think that I would have wanted to do that. I'm keeping it on the existing gearing. I like it the way it is. Now, obviously there's no ride-by-wire on this bike. It is a mechanical cable, which means you don't get any rider modes, and more importantly, you don't get cruise control. Now, I knew that when I bought this bike, so what I did was I picked up one of those little mechanical cruise control gadgets that you strap to your throttle, and I played around a little bit with that on this trip just to see if it was any good.
Check this out. No hand on the throttle. Still just cruising along at 71, 72. What's the story there? Well, I've got a little mechanical cruise control I'm testing out. It seems to be working pretty well.
It was surprisingly effective. It worked really well. I'd get the bike up to 72 and, you know, tighten it down and sort of push it down, and it would brace itself against the brake lever, and I'd let go and it would just sit there cruising along at 72. And I was frankly shocked at how good it worked. I did mention the windshield, and I also mentioned that it does rattle if you've got it extended on bumpy roads. So the ABS switch, I already mentioned that. It's fantastic, but of course it does forget the settings when you turn the bike off. So you just have to remember, if you do turn the bike off, you have to re-switch the bike into off-road mode.
Gotta do the ABS again.
I did ride for many hours on this trip in the dark as I was trying to get to trailheads before sunrise, and I would say my experience was mostly positive, especially with the high beams on. I think it definitely puts out enough light. The issue that I had, and I think a lot of people have with LED lights, is that because it doesn't diffuse like a normal halogen light, it's very like directed. When you're going on really twisty roads, the beam points itself in a very specific direction. And I know a lot of people will put auxiliary lights on the bike, and I thought about maybe doing that, but again, I've already got enough stuff bolted to this bike that I don't really want to add the extra weight for the potential hour or two I might be riding in the dark on some trip in the future. So I do have the high fender installed on the bike. I bought this as an accessory just mostly because I like the look of it. I think the aesthetics, it just looks cooler. I'm sort of mixed now on my feeling about the high fender. I still like the look of it better, but it almost is less practical than the lower fender, which hugs the tire a little bit closer and really kind of blocks out the rocks and things from chipping up as it extends much lower on the tire. So there's a small chance I might put the lower fender back on the front tire. I'm kind of uncertain about that. All right, so we're getting to the end here. I've just got a couple other things I want to mention. First of all is the throttle, which is a common topic. Yes, there's a little bit of twitchiness to the throttle. If you pull in all the slack on the cable and you get things tweaked nicely, you can basically eliminate most of it. The only time I really noticed it was when I was on a slow dirt road and I was trying to be very careful with my inputs. I would notice it a little bit, but it was very minimal. It was nowhere near as bad as it is on my CRF. So just keep that in mind. I think you can eliminate most of it. And with that said, there's also supposedly an operating system update that you can pull down through the CFMoto over-the-air feature that will update your system and actually help eliminate that as well. There's like a new fuel mapping or something. So far, I have not received any updates to my bike, which is a little frustrating because I know other US owners have talked about how they've received the notification of an update and they have been able to download it successfully over the air, and they have a newer version number than the one I'm running, so I'm not sure why I didn't get it yet. I've reached out to customer service and asked, like, hey, how come I haven't gotten this update yet? And all they say is, well, the updates are pushed out in groups and they just haven't gotten to your group yet. So I'm not sure how much I believe that, but it is a little bit annoying that I haven't been able to actually update my operating system yet. Otherwise, I do love the T-Box and the app. I'm able to get all the statistics from all my ride. Every time I move the bike, I get a notification on my phone that it's been moved. It's pretty slick, actually. The technology that's built in is pretty slick. And now I do realize that means somewhere on this bike, there's an electronic device that in theory means someone could be gathering data from it and observing my motions and whereabouts on a day-to-day basis. But I've got news for you. You all have one of those in your pocket. It's called your phone. So am I worried about some foreign government tracking my location? Not really. Does it sometimes have me scratching my head a little bit? Maybe. But I do like all the data that I can pull from this. I'm sure I've got a similar device in my drone and basically every other electronic device that I carry that's made in other countries. So keep that in mind. The T-Box is pretty slick, but I'm not sure why the over-the-air downloads aren't working. So let's talk about the other big elephant in the room, and that's the weight. Bone stock, I think this bike is a pretty decent weight for what it is. I think it was probably a few pounds lighter than my older Himalayan, but once you put on the beefier skid plate and the crash protection and the hand guards, and you start bolting stuff on it, especially the hard panniers, it's got to be well over 450 pounds now. So it is heavy. I feel that weight. Do I wish it were lighter? Yeah, I do. I wouldn't say it felt heavier than the Himalayan when I had that all loaded up. Probably about the same. The hard panniers, as much as I love them, I think if I know I'm going on a trip where I don't need to lock my stuff, I will probably switch to soft panniers. The other thing is the lower crash bars. I really am considering taking them back off. I kept them on because I thought they would kind of give me extra protection, obviously, but also give me a place to sort of rest my feet on those long highway days. I don't think it justifies the extra weight. So these are probably coming off just to shave a few pounds, I think, but I will obviously keep the upper crash bars on it. That is the two comments I would make about the weight. This is the first big bike I've had that didn't have a center stand. So I was a little worried about doing this big trip with only a side stand, but I managed perfectly fine. I had no issues. I have the center stand, the CFMoto center stand, sitting at home, still wrapped in bubble wrap, that I could put on this bike to get a center stand, but it is so heavy that I really don't want to bolt any more weight on. So I think for now, this is how I'm going to keep it. I did carry with me a tank bag on this trip. I have the Moto Nomax bag, which I really like. It's a great bag. It kind of has all the right compartments that I like, but it is very tall. And I found that given the shape of the tank and kind of how I strapped it onto the bike, I kept bumping it. There was a moment on the trip where a car pulled out in front of me, despite making direct eye contact with me. I'm sure you've all been there. So I think I'm at the point now, since the bike is paid off, that I'm gonna invest in the, pun intended, in the Alpine Stars airbag vest. So if any of you have used that particular new vest, I'd love to get some feedback in the comments. And that's it for now. So please feel free to ask me questions about things in the comments that I most likely forgot some important points. But the TLDR, we finally have gotten to it, is that I am really pleased with this bike. I'm just content with it. I'm pleased with my purchase. After 2,200 miles and a 1,500 mile 7-day trip, I have no regrets as of now. Is it the perfect unicorn? That's what everyone wants to know. Nope, it's not. I don't think it's the perfect bike. I think it's a really damn good bike. Is it better than my old Himalayan? Pretty much in every possible way. There's maybe a few exceptions there where I might rate the Himalayan a little higher, but it really is the bike that I was looking to step up into. What's next? I'm back from my big adventure. My bike's paid off. Where do we go from here? Well, the road in front of me is wide open, my friends. So I'm excited to see where it takes me on the new Ibex, and on the CRF still. I'm going to be riding that as well. And with that, we'll close her up and we'll say, take care, everyone. Be safe out there. And I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to the next adventure, whatever it might be. So see y'all. Wapow!